P90 trigger unit. I got some questions the last while about why it sometimes shoots full auto when not intended, and well, I'll just explain how it works, why it's so stiff, and then on the next video I can explain what I did to make it better. So first, how does it work? Well, underneath here we of course got the trigger. So first of all, this trigger, exactly the point of this trigger bar, get my universal showing and tell device. So this trigger bar here pushes on this here, well, also a trigger bar to release the hammer. So this here, this trigger bar is inside this thingamajig, trigger unit, and it's also held in place with a pretty stiff spring. The spring is, let's see, I'd say 0.5, and length is, well, 19 to 20, all depends. 4mm diameter. So what happens is, this here is the German trigger bar. It's cut here, so we cannot shoot full auto because it's illegal here in Germany, but for demonstration purposes I got another trigger bar. I'll just put it in there. We can use this when playing in France or other countries where it's allowed. So how does this here work? This here, the front, is where the trigger bar from inside the body will push. The trigger bar in the back got a face here. It's around here, and it will push. This is one of my printed ones. It will push on this face here. So when it pushes, the sear goes forward and thus release the hammer. So let me demonstrate. It's already released. This here is, I don't know what you call it, but the bolt holds this forward and that allows the hammer to travel all the way. So when I push here with my hand, it'll put the sear up just a tad and release the hammer. So there you go, easy peasy. So this here is a semi-auto sear. What that does is, if you keep the trigger pressed when it's released, well, if you don't engage it again, so it'll hold the hammer until you release the trigger all the way, and then it'll release it back onto the sear. So what this here, which is not used in Germany, does, it disables the semi-auto sear, and what actually fires the thing is this here. When the bolt comes forward, when it's back, the hammer will only go here, and when the bolt slams it, it'll fire. So bolt will go back over it, get it back, this here returns, it will hold it, and if the semi-auto sear is disengaged, it'll release it again, waiting for the bolt to come forward. That's pretty standard in most firearms today. Soft air doesn't matter, it's pretty much the same way it works. Here is for soft air only. This here is the presses the valve, thus releasing gas and shooting. So problem here is why it's so hard is, once is this here trigger spring, but it is necessary for the trigger bar or else it won't go back. When you release a trigger, it'll stay back. You could put a lighter spring in there. I did something else, I'll show you afterwards. But because you got two faces and not a motion around a point, it's very hard. So what I did is I made this part. These are printed for testing purposes only. I just made this here, gets pushed by the trigger bar down here. Trigger bar, I made a trigger bar as well. It pushes it, and then it'll push this here up and thus releasing it. I also made a semi-auto sear for it, just for testing. And when you get a motion, just a turning motion, and you just get an easier trigger pull. Then it's the same way the Chris Vector works. You got in the Chris Vector, you got a surface. When the trigger is pulled back, it rides the surface up and releases here. Here, it works the same way. When you push that surface but straight back, you get more, I guess, friction and resistance. And that's why it's so hard. So that's one part of it. The second part is when you shoot full auto only. It is because you got. See if I can get this back in here. It'll also be a short video. There you go. So it's because the bar here goes too far back when you're really trying just to shoot semi-auto, and you get full auto. It's actually, from the videos and what I heard, pretty common. And the problem is, if you prop this here trigger bar up in the front so it gets further back, that is exactly what happens. Just let me get this here out of the way. So usually it got that much play, and if you're holding it and pressing, you'll see this here, this hole in the middle gets smaller, and thus you won't get all the action transferred. But you usually see it only when there's resistance in the back. What you need to do here is, first of all, don't prop your trigger bar here. Where's my universal pointing glass? Don't prop it up in the front. That'll push it back around 2.5 millimeters, and that will engage the semi-auto sear sooner than the settings allow down here. If you prop it to semi-auto, through this is like you are pressing the trigger 2.5 millimeter further back, and when you're shooting semi-auto, it releases it just as you get to the semi-auto sear, and thus pressing it further back will prop it out of there, will disengage the semi-auto sear. Just these two surfaces. And that's why I, for my part here, because I made a small trigger wedge. It props the trigger forward, lock it into these surfaces that are curved, and because I also block it in the middle, it just is smoother. So let's see if I can put it in there in one of the first 5 tries. So, well, actually it did work fairly well until I let go. So, try once more. Trigger bar forward, and then needs to snap in there. I made some curves in it. There you go. Made some curves, it'll stay in there. I haven't had it fall out yet. And now the trigger bar, the trigger has almost no movement at all. I didn't want to put it too hard. So this should solve any semi-auto problem you got. So another way to smooth up your trigger, you need to feel, does the trigger move easily? If it doesn't, what was with mine, these two screws were way too fastened. So the trigger would bind up on the side and it will be very hard to press it. And I'll just release these two a bit and then just enough that the trigger has a bit of movement to the side, just a bit. And then you got a smoother trigger pull. So to smooth up the original trigger, you first up have to smooth this on all sides. As a top rides inside, bottom rides, side, inside, outside here. Everything is touching something. So I smoothed it up just to see how good a trigger I can get. You need to do the same on these sides here. Because this trigger bar is running on the side, you need to do it up here, here. And that's pretty much what you can do with the original parts. So next video I'll come back to what I did.